A heavy iron drill bit bites into the earth in the late summer of 1889. It crushes its way through sand, gravel, and solid basalt, sinking deeper and deeper into the prehistoric past of the Idaho Territory. When it reaches a depth of 300 feet, the crew pulls up the sand pump to clear the debris. Inside the wet clay brought up from the absolute darkness is something that should not exist. A tiny, perfectly shaped human figurine. The problem is not the doll itself. The problem is the layer of earth it came from. Geologists tell us that the stratum at that depth is roughly 2 million years old. Millions of years before Homo sapiens were supposed to be walking the earth, let alone firing clay art in a kiln. We are looking at a collision of two impossible things. Either our entire timeline of human history on this continent is missing a massive, unimaginable chapter, or someone orchestrated one of the most brilliant and inexplicable hoaxes of the 19th century. We are going to look at the mechanical reality of how that well was drilled, at the physical evidence left on the doll itself, at the immediate refusal of the scientific establishment to even examine it, and at the reasons why, over a century later, this tiny piece of clay still refuses to neatly fit into either the hoax category or the history books. Long before anyone started arguing over timelines, you have to understand the ground this happened on. The year is 1889, and the American West is in the middle of a massive transformation. Nampa, Idaho is a railroad town, growing fast and desperate for resources. The most critical resource of all is water. The town needs a reliable artesian well, and a man named Mark Kurtz is managing the drilling operation. This is not a small backyard dig. This is a heavy industrial operation using a steam-powered rig. They are driving a heavy iron tube, 6 inches in diameter, straight down through the earth to keep the walls from collapsing, while a massive drill bit shatters the rock and clay at the bottom. To understand what they achieved and what they found, you first have to understand what they were working with. No modern sensors. No ground-penetrating radar, just steam, iron, and gravity. To people living in the late 19th century, the layers of the earth were a new kind of history book, one that scientists were just beginning to read. They knew that as you go deeper, you go further back in time. The top layers hold the recent past. The deeper you go, through lava flows and ancient lake beds, the closer you get to a world before humans. If you enjoy stories the history books quietly skipped, consider subscribing, because this channel lives on them. We are going to look at the specific machinery used that day, at the moment the artifact saw the light, at the geological report that turned it into a controversy, and at the strange quiet that fell over the case when the questions got too hard to answer. And this is where the story stops being a dusty record and becomes a physical mystery, because in August, the drill reaches exactly 320 feet. The crew is working through a layer of coarse sand and clay. The process requires them to periodically drop a sand pump down the iron casing. The pump acts like a vacuum, sucking up the pulverized rock and mud so the drill can keep working. On one of these routine pulls, the pump brings up a mass of clay balls. Mark Kurtz is standing right there by the rig. He watches as one of his men washes the mud away. As the water clears the dirt, something rolls out into the light. It is a small figure, about 1.5 inches long, made of baked clay. It has arms, legs, a head, and faint geometric markings on the chest. It is undeniably human-made. Kurtz realizes instantly that something is wrong. The iron casing of the well was driven down tight against the earth, meaning nothing from the surface could have fallen down the outside of the pipe. And the drill bit had been churning through solid rock and clay for weeks. This object, whatever it was, came from the bottom. Kurtz takes the figurine and eventually hands it over to Charles Adams, a prominent local figure, who sends it to one of the most respected geologists of the time, George Frederick Wright. When Wright examines it, he finds something that defies a simple explanation. The clay of the figurine matches the exact type of clay found at the 300-foot level of the well. Even more strangely, the doll is coated in patches of red iron oxide, a natural rust-like deposit that takes immense amounts of time to form in the earth. The official explanation, the one that would soon dominate the headlines, was simple, but it left the physical reality of the object completely unexplained. because almost immediately, the scientific establishment pushed back. John Wesley Powell, the legendary explorer and head of the Smithsonian Institution, heard about the Nampa figurine and dismissed it out of hand. According to the leading voices in Washington, the artifact was a hoax. The explanation was that a bored well digger, or perhaps a local prankster, had taken a toy belonging to a nearby Native American child or a pioneer family and simply dropped it down the open iron pipe to mess with the crew. It was a time when frontier hoaxes were common, and scientists were tired of being made fools of. But there was something none of them had checked yet. George Frederick Wright pointed out the mechanical reality of the drill. If someone had dropped a fragile clay doll down a 6-inch pipe, it would have landed directly in the path of a heavy churning iron drill bit. It should have been pulverized into dust in seconds. Instead, it came up intact inside a ball of deep earth clay. Furthermore, the red iron oxide stains were deeply ingrained in the crevices of the baked clay. A prankster could not have applied those stains overnight. So we are left with a situation where the official explanation requires a physical miracle. A fragile doll surviving a crushing industrial drill, and a prankster somehow mimicking geological aging perfectly on short notice. The skepticism was necessary, but the counter-arguments made the simple hoax theory look incredibly fragile. Everything now points in one direction, and it is a direction no one is entirely comfortable with. The mechanical evidence, the iron oxide, and the matching clay suggest the object really was buried deep in the earth. Yet the geological reality is that a human civilization could not have existed in Idaho 2 million years ago. So here is the version that every piece of evidence finally points to. The Nampa figurine is likely neither a 2-million-year-old artifact nor a cheap prank dropped down a pipe. Geological experts who later reviewed the case suggested a third possibility. In highly unstable geological areas, massive fissures can open up in the earth. Deep underground streams and shifting faults can cause items from the surface, or from shallow graves, to fall hundreds of feet down into older strata over thousands of years. The doll could be ancient, perhaps hundreds or thousands of years old, created by the indigenous peoples of the region, and over time, it was pulled down by the shifting earth into a layer where it did not belong. The drill simply found it where the earth had buried it. We cannot prove every last detail because the well is long gone and the earth has closed up. But of every explanation ever offered, this is the only one that respects both the physical evidence on the doll and the established timeline of human history, which means the people on the ground were right to say it came from the deep, and the scientists were right to say it could not have been made 2 million years ago. Both were true. But the answer is not really where this story ends, because what it tells us about ourselves is the part that lingers. The Nampa figurine sits in a museum today, a tiny piece of baked clay that caused some of the greatest minds of the 19th century to draw lines in the sand. We like to think that history is a neat, ordered book, but this object is a reminder that the earth is constantly shifting, swallowing things up, and mixing the pages together. When we encounter something that breaks our timeline, our first instinct is often to call it a lie. The harder, braver thing to do is to look at the evidence and admit that the world is more complicated than our models. Think back to that heavy iron drill, biting through the rock, bringing up a piece of human art from the absolute dark. It is a monument to how much is still waiting beneath our feet, completely out of place, waiting to ask us a question we are not ready for. So I want to ask you this. Do you think artifacts like this are just geological accidents? Or do you think there are entirely lost chapters of human history we simply refuse to accept? Tell me in the comments. I read them. I really do want to hear your answer to that, because the comments under these videos are half the reason I make them. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, the ones the history books quietly skipped, then subscribe. That is the only way you will catch the next one, and there are stranger ones coming. If it kept you here to the end, a like genuinely helps more people find it. That is not a small thing. It is the whole reason channels like this survive. Thank you for staying with me all the way through. Keep asking why the quiet places are quiet. I will see you in the next one.